to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt.
Welcome to another episode of Black and White and Thin Blue Lines. I'm Lauren Pountnay.
And I'm Serge Antonin.
And my name is Clarke Ahlers. In this episode, we're going to stray a little bit from our pure criminal justice presentations. And this is why. This summer, Lauren Pountnay is working as my intern and law clerk. She's a rising senior at North Carolina State. And I asked her, what is really on the minds of young people and what should we be talking about on this podcast? And Lauren had some ideas.
I believe that the aftermath of the presidential debate took place 2 weeks ago is something that is in the news a lot recently and something that young people are really discussing a lot in social media. And
so we're going to do a presentation today on the 25th Amendment. There's a lot of talk in the news about the 25th Amendment. Frankly, I read the 25th Amendment when I was in law school. I never heard of it again or thought of it again until September of 2018. Then former President Trump was in the process of firing FBI Director James Comey. And Assistant Attorney General Rod Rosenstein allegedly discussed secretly tape recording Trump and then using the tape to recruit members of the cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment. On January 12, 2021, obviously about 6 days after the infamous January 6 riot at the Capitol, the United States House of Representatives passed a resolution along party lines urging then Vice President Michael Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment against Donald Trump. Of course, on January 20th, 21, Joe Biden was inaugurated as our president. Now, in the aftermath of the presidential debate, which took place in June 27th, 2024, there's talk again of the 25th Amendment. Honestly, without looking it up, I didn't know what it was, and I thought we would explain that to our listeners. But Serge, you had some points I think you wanted to make about it. Is that right?
Well, one of the things is that the amendment, for people who don't understand the history behind it, the amendment was finally ratified. It was inspired, first of all, by the Kennedy assassination. And after that, it was ratified. And I also don't think that people realize that it has actually been used several times throughout history, and I'll go into that later. But Section 3 of the amendment deals with the voluntary transfer of power or removal. And Section 4 deals with the involuntary transfer of power or removal of the president, which is very interesting considering what we're dealing with now. However, it's funny because some of the stuff I'm hearing, like on social media and such, people are discussing the 25th Amendment in regards to finding a new candidate. For that, you don't need the 25th Amendment. You just need a new candidate. But in order to remove our current president, Joe Biden, from office, you would need to invoke the 25th Amendment.
Well, how did it come to be? As Serge said, Congress approved the 25th Amendment on July 6, 1965, really in response to the Kennedy assassination. Article 5 of the Constitution talks about the way to amend the Constitution. And one way to amend the Constitution is by a vote of 3/4 of the states. 38 states completed ratification of the 25th Amendment on February 10, 1967, and President Lyndon Johnson certified the amendment on February 23rd. Serge talked about Sections 3 and 4. I first want to briefly talk about Sections 1 and Sections 2 of the 4 sections of the 25th Amendment. Section 1 says, in case of the removal of the president from office or of his death or resignation, the vice president shall become president. Now, why this section? Actually, before the assassination of John F. Kennedy in November of 1963, there had been academic debate over whether the vice president, in the case of the death of the president, actually became the president or merely assumed the authority of the president. So Section 1 just makes that clear. If the president dies, vice president becomes president. And then Section 2 dealt with if the vice president becomes president or if there's a vacancy in the office of the vice president, what should be done? The answer is the president shall nominate a vice president who shall take office upon confirmation by a majority of vote of both houses of Congress.
And that's important because historically, the office was allowed to sit vacant until possibly the next election date. So
now, if President Biden were to resign from office prior to the expiration of his term of office, which ends January 20th, 2025, unless he's reelected, of course, the vice president would need to be confirmed by the Senate, which is majority Democrat, and the House of Representatives, which is majority Republican. And in fact, at least one candidate, third-party candidate, Robert F. Kennedy, has indicated that he thinks there are ways that, frankly, he could become involved if the parties could not agree. Now, Lauren, your thoughts on why you think young people are discussing the 25th Amendment. What was it about the debate?
I believe that the debate was kind of not the first, because obviously it was the second debate we've seen between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, but the first time recently that my generation especially really tuned in to something of this nature and really saw Joe Biden, maybe his inability to get his points across clearly, or read correctly, or I know there was one thing people were talking about when he was delivering a medal to a soldier. He was reading the words like "deliver medal to soldier." And there's just been
golf swing, Lauren.
Oh yeah, so there's just been a lot of conversation around his mental capacities, and I think in the debate that really came to light, and so that sparked a lot of conversation on social media, especially with my age group, and yeah, I think a lot of people had a lot of things to say about, wow, that's really our president up there.
Horrific. It was horrific.
So
your thoughts, Serge?
Well, my thoughts, Clarke. It was horrific. I just said, but I think.
You mean the debate performance?
Yeah. Oh, yes. It was horrific, and so that's why I think that people now are clamoring for the 25th Amendment once they realize exactly what it is to be invoked, so that we don't have to go to sleep thinking that Joe Biden is running the country when he couldn't run a KFC in West Baltimore. So we got to do something.
Well, Section 3 of the 25th Amendment reads, whenever the president, in this case, obviously Joe Biden, transmits to the president pro tempore of the Senate. Now, that person is currently Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, currently Mike Johnson, a Republican out of Louisiana, his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and until he transmits to them a written declaration to the contrary, such powers and duties shall be discharged by the vice president as acting president. So let me take a moment and just explain Section 3 carefully. Section 3 is revocable, meaning Biden remains president. Kamala Harris would be two things simultaneously, the vice president of the United States and the acting president of the United States. And I don't really think that's what people are talking about. I really think what people are talking about with the 25th Amendment is Section 4. So, Section 4, a little bit technical here, and here's where I think there could be some controversy and potentially constitutional crisis. Whenever the vice president, currently Kamala Harris, and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments. Now, the executive departments, there are 15 offices of the United States in the cabinet. Now, I'll go through them in a few minutes. But she would need 8 votes. So Kamala Harris plus 8 members of the cabinet, or such other body as Congress may by law provide. At the time being, I know of no such other body. Transmit to the president pro tempore of the Senate, again, Senator Patty Murray, and the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. The vice president shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office of the acting president. Now, just a second on this. What that means is that Kamala Harris and 8 members of the cabinet write to the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, and she becomes the acting president of the United States. But wait, President Biden can rebut this in writing. Thereafter, when the president transmits to those same two people, President Pro Tem and Speaker of the House, his written declaration that no disability exists, he shall resume the powers and duties of the office. And again, stand by.
Who's going to write that for him?
Well,
I don't see him being able to really rebut that, especially after what we've seen. However, considering the timing, I don't think that it would even go through.
well, I respectfully disagree. All he has to do is write one sentence. I'm able to be
No,
president.
I agree with that. My point is, I don't think that they'll be able to remove him with the 25th Amendment as well.
Well, what happens next is there's what's called a surrebuttal, meaning Kamala Harris, and again, a majority of the principal officers of the cabinet, so 8 votes, transmit within 4 days. They have 4 days to rebut the president. Then Congress shall decide the issue. Congress has to assemble within 48 hours for the purpose of deciding who's the president of the United States, and they need a 2/3 vote of both houses, 67 senators and 290 members of the House must determine who the president is. And I think that that's where you have a potential constitutional crisis, right there between the rebuttal and the surrebuttal, because it's not clear to me on a reading of the Constitution if both the vice president and cabinet believe they're in charge and the president believes he's in charge, who's in charge until Congress makes the decision. Absolutely. And when you think about what's going on in the world between Russia and Ukraine, between Iran and Israel, between China and Taiwan, to me, you see opportunity for other countries to take advantage of a weak executive during this period of time. Your thoughts?
Well, that may be true, but we're on the horizon of a election. That's going to be a very important one. So I don't think that we're going to see him removed, but I do think we may see someone else step in and be the next candidate for this 2024 election.
Well, that's entirely different. That's beyond the 25th Amendment. That's actually an interesting issue of law within the Democratic Party primary system. Right now, the delegates that have voted for Biden or pledged to Biden, he can release those delegates. That would make it a non-legal issue, and the delegates be free to vote for whomever they wanted. But if Biden does not release those delegates, then there's a legal issue as to whether those delegates are compelled to, and it may be different state to state, but are compelled to vote for Biden as they pledged to do originally, or whether they can vote for another candidate at the convention. Thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that we've got some real soul searching to do as a nation, and they've got to step up and do the right thing as far as the delegates go, because what we saw in the debate speaks to what you said. These other countries see a weak executive, and if we vote him in again...
Well, actually, what I said, to be very careful, what I said was, I did not say the country would see a weak executive because of the debate. I made no comment about
you didn't make a comment
the debate.
About the debate.
Right, I really didn't. I said that if there was a tension between who was in charge, either the vice president and a majority of the cabinet, or the president, until the Congress put that to rest, I think that there would be a potential weakness that would be critical. For example, some practical issues. Who has a nuclear football? Who has the nuclear codes?
And were he to be reelected, that would make that weakness more glaring.
Well, I'm not making any comment whatsoever politically.
All right. Me neither.
None.
Me neither. All right.
I'm really trying to I really am simply trying to be academic about this.
Gotcha.
One of the things I think is interesting is who is our cabinet right now, and what are the cabinet positions. And let me just real quickly, if you don't mind, go through those. Department of State, Treasury, Interior, Agriculture, Justice, Merrick Garland, Commerce, Labor, Defense, Lloyd Austin, Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, Transportation, Buttigieg, Energy, Education, Veterans Affairs, and Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas.
Isn't that rich?
Mayorkas, Buttigieg, Anthony Blinken, Janet Yellen, Merrick Garland, Lloyd Austin, I think I'm up to 6 or 7, and a couple of others, and Kamala Harris could unseat the President of the United States constitutionally.
If I'm not mistaken, I do remember seeing something that Yellen actually said that they were not currently, at least, discussing any 25th Amendment conversations.
I think you're right, and I don't have any evidence that there's a 25th Amendment memo circulating among the cabinet or anything like that. One of the, I guess, I would think that a cabinet, it's very, very clear that the 25th Amendment requires the vice president to act. And so Kamala Harris so far has been diligent in supporting President Joe Biden and has not indicated at all that she believes the 25th Amendment ought to be invoked. So I think as a practical matter, you would not see a tilting of the majority unless and until Kamala Harris led the way. And I really have no. Anybody got a thought about that? Or
that would be a bombshell if she did, because she's ride or die for old Sleepy Joe.
She thinks he got this.
Yeah. She's somewhere thinking the election performance was good.
Where did you get that? Did she say that?
She said that, yeah.
Somewhere thinking this was good.
Okay. Well, all right. So, interestingly, some of our listeners are old enough to recall that in March of 1981, President Reagan was shot and in Washington, D.C., and then Secretary of State Alexander Haig held a famous press conference at the White House where he said that he's president and he's in charge. There's also something called presidential succession. It's a little bit different, but I just think our audience ought to know about that. The succession is Vice President, Speaker of the House, President pro tem of the Senate, and then Secretary of State, then Secretary of Treasury. So basically, Janet Yellen, who's saying they aren't talking about it, she's fifth in line to be President of the United States. In fact, it's kind of interesting to me how many people constitutionally and by statute, presidential successions by a statute, not by our Constitution, but it's pretty interesting to me how many of these people get to vote and then are in the line of succession. Virtually all of the cabinet is in the line of succession, so that theoretically you could have kind of a quiet coup where self-interested parties in the line of presidential succession voted with first of all being the vice president and then these others. And throughout my lifetime, I've never thought of it as being particularly close until there was talk about it when President Trump fired Jim Comey from the FBI. That's when Rod Rosenstein started talking about the 25th Amendment, allegedly. But I've never heard a vice president talking about it. And even after the House of Representatives voted for Mike Pence to invoke it, Mike Pence did not. So it would be, I forget your exact word, but it would be a landmine. It would be a huge bombshell if the vice president, Kamala Harris, did indicate she was invoking
and said, hey,
the 25th.
let's do this.
I think it would be far more likely, for a lot of political reasons, that if the president believed he was not capable of serving out his term, I would think he would probably send the letter under Section 3, allowing Kamala Harris to be the acting president until he felt better. Again, I make no comment on the politics of this.
Found the Pountnay youth, maybe something like that.
No comment.
Anyway, I'm gonna talk about a couple of times in history where the 25th Amendment has been invoked, and one I'm sure you'll remember: Spiro Agnew's resignation in '73, that led to Gerald Ford's nomination and confirmation as vice president. And then in 1985, President Ronald Reagan temporarily transferred power due to a surgery he was undergoing to then Vice President George Bush. So,
in fact, I think President George Bush also did that at one time. Was undergoing surgery one or two times and voluntarily relinquished power to an acting president.
So it's not unheard of for the amendment to be invoked, but you know.
No, I don't think it is. Although it's recent in terms of the constitutional history of the United States. This is post 1963 assassination of President Kennedy that even came about.
Well, think about this. There were presidents for like 100 years before that. So what made that become a necessary amendment? You know what I mean? So I could think of a few different things. Maybe politics being involved at the time. Who knows?
Well, I think that just the fact that people perish.
Yes, absolutely.
So, further thoughts?
Something that has kind of surprised me throughout all is conservatives. They're, I feel like are really pushing for this 25th Amendment, which is kind of surprising because that would mean that Kamala Harris, takes power. And in my opinion, I think she would probably be a little bit more liberal in office. So their, discussion by Republicans, or conservatives, on that topic is a little bit just surprising to me that they would, want.
Maybe they think it would increase the likelihood of Trump winning his reelection.
That is true.
You know what I mean? So,
well, throughout his presidency, Biden has polled higher than Kamala Harris in popularity. Mm-hmm. So it might be the thinking of certain Republicans that she's even less popular than Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. I would think that be careful, Republicans, what you wish for. Yeah. First of all, if she became president, if she went from acting president to president, she'd be the first African-American woman president of the United States. Mm-hmm. And anything could happen between now and the election which would permit her to rise to the occasion. In other words, if there was an international crisis and she did well, I think people would then see her in a different light than they see her right now. She's been labeled laughing Kamala by Trump.
Yeah.
And that refers to her unusual laughter that often follows her comments or commentary.
Unwarranted hysterics.
And but so I think that you have to be very, very careful what you wish for. And the other thing is that the President of the United States has an awful lot of power to affect policy, even a potentially short period of time. And she might do things which would be very, very popular. I personally think, this is not going into politics, really, this is just going into kind of the strategy. I'm not making a qualitative judgment on any of this. But I think the most interesting thing about Biden potentially giving up power under the 25th Amendment is what that does to his right to commute sentences or to pardon. Because I think that
Hunter Biden come to mind?
Well, I do think I think Hunter Biden, and I think although it's much less talked about, his brother, who may be under investigation for certain tax issues and so forth. So, and then the issue of himself. In other words, one of the problems with lawfare under the Biden administration has been that should the Republicans or Trump take power in 2025, they could appoint a special prosecutor to retaliate in kind by investigating the Biden family.
Absolutely. So
I do think that, to me, one of the real interesting aspects of this, just strategy-wise, this is a law school exam kind of issue. But suppose that Biden were not to pardon or commute his son's sentence until sometime during the 25th Amendment process. I think the question would be, did he have the power to do it? Was he president, or somebody else president? There can only be one president under the 25th Amendment. That's why I think there's a real tension when both claim they're president.
Yes.
And by the way, the only thing in our lifetime, which I think is in my lifetime, that's come close to that, was after the election between Bush and Gore. I thought there was a point. As I recall, Clinton was president, so Clinton was the commander-in-chief. There was a recount going on in Florida. The issue went before the Supreme Court, and I thought that both Bush and Gore had legitimate claims that they had won Florida. Well, I did, and so I thought this might invoke a constitutional crisis for the first time in my lifetime because, for example, if Clinton sided with Gore and the Supreme Court sided with Bush on the issue, I remember thinking we could have a crisis.
I remember that. Not that it had a big impact.
And I forgot, and I don't know my history well enough to know this, but I think Gore was the vice president then, whose job it was probably to certify the election results. I might be wrong on that. But so, I mean, certainly I think, I grew up, I guess, and Lauren, I'm probably 2 or 3 generations older than you, but I grew up in a time where I honestly believed the United States was the best as well as most powerful country on the planet, and that our system of government, I was taught this in civics and government classes, and it continued through high school, college, and law school, that our constitutional system with a democracy and a division of power was a model for the whole world as a way of having unified government and peaceful transition of power. And of course, what has many people upset about January 6th is they viewed it as an effort to stop a peaceful transfer of power after an election. And I guess I never thought about all the other ways that there could be tension. I mean, January 6th, in my opinion, was just a riot at the Capitol that was put down by police within hours. I don't think it was nearly the existential threat that others do, primarily because of my bias as a former cop, not because of political, just because I'm 100% convinced cops will take care of a riot in a fairly short amount of time. They're better organized, they have communication.
Nowadays?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. In other words, I don't think it was going to be out of hand. I remember, God rest both their souls, but I talked to both my mother and sister, both of whom are now deceased, about it while it was happening, and predicted the police would have it under control by midnight. And the reason I put it till midnight was I thought somebody might be barricaded in one of the offices and the police would not want to shoot that person and gain the national publicity. They would probably have a hostage negotiator come in and say, please leave Pelosi's office, leave the ashtrays, and
leave the podium.
And get the hell, leave the podium and get the hell out of there. And actually they had it cleaned up much before then. So I do think that with former law enforcement, I never saw January 6th as any legitimate threat to the continuity of power in the United States of America. Now, having said that, now examining all of the potential constitutional crises built into the Constitution, where, people in the presidential succession get to vote whether the guy in charge, coupled with the fact that one of the reasons I think Lauren's having the question she's having about Joe Biden is because until the debate, the media largely did not report on mental shortcomings of Joe Biden. And since the debate, it's been a drip, 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 drip to the point of yesterday, and I find this absurd, but an actor, I forget his name, I don't follow acting, you do, Serge. Who's the actor who came out yesterday against
I don't know.
The guy who held the big fundraiser for Biden?
Clooney, not Cooney. I was thinking Jerry Cooney, the old fighter.
Yes, you were.
Yeah.
But George Clooney, the actor, he came out yesterday saying Biden should step aside.
Yeah.
And so there's been this kind of pressure on the president from donors, from some politicians, and from others, but particularly from members of the media who heretofore made no reports about this. And in fact, obviously there's a right-wing media in this country,
absolutely,
likely represented by Newsmax and Fox, and a left-wing represented by CNN, who considers himself centrist, and MSNBC, who's probably left-wing. And now left-wing, I mean, one of the most interesting things of the debate to me was not the debate itself, which I found disappointing.
To say the least.
If you watch Robert Kennedy address these issues, and I don't care what your politics are, but you compare him to whatever Trump says or whatever Biden says, to me you see a person who's capable of analysis and critical thinking. I guess that's a little bit political, but the point is, sorry
That's right.
to our listeners, but the point is, the most interesting thing to me was after the debate, how commentators on MSNBC and CNN threw Biden under the bus.
And you know what?
I mean, within minutes of the debate, it was cold.
You can't neglect the power of the internet and social media too, and their effect on mainstream media. It's insane. It's insane.
Well, years ago, there was an artist who said that all of us will be famous for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's what the internet gives us.
Everybody who wants.
They're 15 minutes.
Serge Antonin, Lauren Pountnay, and Clarke Ahlers are having their 15 minutes of fame right now. A little more than 15 minutes. Any concluding thoughts from anybody?
What about you there, Lauren? Ladies first.
I'm really interested to see what's going to happen in this upcoming election. I do think it's still going to be close, but I do think that it'll probably sway the other direction this time around. Than
What do you mean in the election?
Yes.
So you're predicting, you're going to November and predicting
Trump
is going to win. Yeah.
Trump victory?
I think all of this conversation and discussion about Biden's mental capacities it goes kind of beyond just your personal feelings and beliefs about stuff, when you can really see it firsthand how this person is not capable of running a country, let alone standing up in front of people and giving a speech. So I think that
the young people have spoken.
Yeah.
Lauren has said okay.
And that goes that's just not even political.
This is next directed to the FBI and Department of
Lauren's
Justice.
just keeping it real.
Right. These comments were not authorized by a licensed attorney in Maryland.
That's my opinion.
Well, my final thoughts are kind of in line with Lauren's. I've stated on here before I vote Democrat, but I think that if something's not done, it will sway the election in the direction of Donald Trump, or former President Donald Trump, and the chips are going to fall where they may. And who can we blame, really, at the end of the day, if that's what is the result?
My final remarks, 2 remarks. First of all, I've heard it said that politicians protest loudest just before they collapse. In other words, Biden is making it clear he's in the election. He's shouting it at this point. So I put virtually no stock in that. And the second thing I'll say is I think the event or events which will likely determine the outcome of the election haven't happened yet. Now, let me tell you what I mean quickly by that. I just think that we're in a dynamic situation right now in the country where anything at either of the 2 conventions could throw everything up in the air. On Trump's side, he's got to pick a vice presidential candidate, and that could help or hurt his popularity. On the Democrat side, I don't know who the candidate's going to be. I know that presumptively it's Joe Biden. But I also think that a little more than the Republican convention, I think at the Democrat convention, there's the possibility for social unrest related to pro-Palestinian protesters, and that's creating a further divide in the party. But I also think it has the effect of pushing the right further right. In other words, I think that those of us, and I probably count myself in that group, who are pro-Israel are offended by the pro-Palestinian. In other words, what Hamas did to me was outrageous, and the idea of being pro-Hamas is unbelievable to me, just unbelievable. And so I think it has a tendency to push, for example, I think the Jewish vote, which is historically Democrat,
yep.
may well go Republican or stay at home.
I'm willing to agree with that.
So
at least.
So I just say I don't think what will determine the elections happened yet. And what that gives me, by the way, is deniability that I didn't.
You don't know what Lauren was talking about.
I threw myself off the line here.
You did, Lauren. I credit you with that, Lauren. Thank you all very much. You can see our website below. We welcome comments and critique from any of you.
And compliments.
You can find us on wherever you listen to podcasts, and also we're on video as well.
Check out our Instagram and TikTok.
There you go. Thank you.
And by the way, Lauren is a social media genius. So.
And Clarke and Serge are not.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
But life is never easy. There's work to be done and obligations to be met, obligations to truth, to justice, and to liberty.
This podcast is the copyrighted property of Black and White and Thin Blue Lines Incorporated, a Maryland corporation. Any rebroadcast of the podcast without the written permission of the owner is prohibited. For more information, we invite you to visit the website blackandwhiteandthinbluelines.com. All of the words in the URL address use common spelling and are typed together with no spaces. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and we welcome your remarks through email. The email addresses of the co-creators, Serge Antonin and Clarke Ahlers, may be found on the website.